The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
Well, Richard, I read everybody your bio, which, by the way, thank Gail for sending that again to me because that was fantastic. And, you know, I have played several of your clips leading up to the airing of this episode. And honestly, man, I just want to say thank you for coming on today and really helping us understand from a world-renowned architect's perspective, you know, what took place with 9/11, because as you and I have talked, you know, to me, 9/11 and what took place that day was the foundation of everything that's happened over the next, 24, 25 years. And so if we really want to think critically about everything that's going on right now, whether that's in Gaza, Palestine, Israel, whether that's in Russia, Ukraine, whether that's in Sudan, whether that happens in Iran, whatever the case may be, it really all comes down to understanding that, hey, you know, that bill of goods we were sold back in, 2001 might not have been what it really was. So anyway, welcome.
Well, it wasn't what it really was.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to sharing this information. Thanks, Ray. Awesome to be here with you today. It does take courage to take in the information and because of the implications are unfortunately dark.
Yeah.
Waking up to these realities of these false flag operations that they bring us is painful.
Yeah.
Was for me in March
it
of
absolutely
2006.
is. And by the way, I did want to say this to everybody. You know, you guys know all these interviews that are well, they're interviews. They're all available on video on Spotify as well as on video on YouTube. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Pandora, those guys, you might want to go to Spotify or YouTube for this one, because this is the first time we're going to have a really in-depth presentation that Richard's going to take us through. So anyway, anybody listening on the audio only side, Richard's going to do a great job of trying to describe what you're seeing on screen, but it's incredibly more impactful if you actually view what he is going to present. So with that, my friend, the floor is yours.
All right, then let's get into it because I had to take this step 18 years ago, and now you do. Let's start with the easy part. This one is not so bad, although most architects and engineers know nothing about the third worst structural failure in modern history after the Twin Towers. Building 7 was an incredible catastrophic event. And most people in the world don't know anything about it. I was shocked to learn about this from David Ray Griffin on the radio. And here it is, a 47-story skyscraper, easily the tallest building in most of our states. And yet it looks dwarfed right next to the tallest buildings in the world at the time they were built, finished in the early 70s. But this building was about a football field in length away from the North Tower. And here it is standing fine. It wasn't hit by a plane, but it went down later in the afternoon at about 5:20. But here it is standing fine, impacted by a few of the beams hit it from the North Tower. And NIST did an investigation into this building. They found that this was not a substantial factor at all in the building's collapse. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, what was? And so, so people say, well, there was damage to the building. Well, even NIST says, no, that's not the cause of this building's collapse. Well, let's look at the collapse. Here's the 5:20 in the afternoon. The east penthouse on the upper left comes down first in an isolated event. And then 6 seconds later, the entire building does this. And so,
Wow.
as you can see, it's dropping smoothly, symmetrically into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. Now, we're going to break this down.
Yeah. And
6
by the way,
ways from Sunday.
anybody, again, we'll try to explain what you're seeing on screen in case you're not looking at the video. But here, I'm going to chime in as a novice. And as a novice, to me, if I just saw this video isolated with no context, I would be like, oh, that's cool. There's a controlled demolition. They must be knocking that building down in order to put something else up. I mean, that thing.
Oh, in fact,
falls
yeah,
perfectly.
we go to, and we go to structural engineering and architecture conferences around the country, and we show architects that are coming by. They say, do you know what this is? He says, oh, that's a controlled demolition.
Yeah.
Oh, do you know when it happened? No, not that one. Well, it happened on 9/11.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Yeah, this was the third tower, because we have to tell them. They thought that's not a twin tower, they say. So yeah, we tell them, we have to take them through the whole story. Well, part of that story is the official narrative of this building's collapse, which is given to us by Shyam Sundar, the project leader for NIST.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. Okay, well then let's look at those fires. Here are those fires.
That's crazy.
As you can see, they're few,
Yeah.
they're small, they're scattered throughout the building. These are the worst fires that we have in the building. And NIST says those are the cause of the fires. In fact, the cause was on the upper, the 12th floor, which, by the way, was the repository. The Securities and Exchange Commission occupied the 12th and 13th floor. They lost hundreds of thousands of files related to many hundreds of cases they were actively pursuing against Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom.
Wow.
So anyway, a lot of people think these fires were
let me
arson.
ask you something on that, because again, from my research, there was a lot of talk about what Building 7 housed and the incredibly important information that it housed. I think the same thing with the Pentagon, the area of the Pentagon that the quote unquote plane ran into. I think Donald Rumsfeld the day before was speaking at the Pentagon talking about how they couldn't track $2.3 trillion at the Pentagon. And then all of a sudden the next day, there's a quote unquote plane that runs into it there. Do you know, like, why?
When you say there, what you mean is the group of individuals, Pentagon officials that were responsible for finding that $2.3 trillion. They were the ones that were killed that day.
Yeah. Okay, great. So
But
this is the fire on Building 7 right now, and it just seems to be contained to the 12th and 13th floor, which, or maybe not.
Well,
contained.
furthermore, the fires are out on the 12th and 13th floor before, like over almost an hour before this building collapsed. And NIST's theory relies on these fires to justify their thermal expansion theory, which we'll get into another time. But these fires, so they exaggerate in their fire simulation that oh yeah, look how bad these fires are. But you actually look at the photographs and they're completely burned out on that floor. Their collapse initiation theory is that these fires expanded these beams and pushed this girder off of its seat on this column 79 and caused a local collapse, which caused a progressive collapse, which caused the whole building to come down in 6 seconds or so. And so we've never lost a steel frame fire protected structure ever in history. This is the first evidence of it at all, occurrence. And not even after 9/11, with these fully engulfed buildings, have we lost one of these skyscrapers.
Okay, so for everybody that is not watching, again, Richard, in this presentation, I mean, these are incredible. These images are amazing. There's an image from Jakarta. There's an image from the UAE. There's an image from London. These buildings look engulfed in fire. I mean, they almost look like a fire has like surrounded the building, but they did not fall. None of these buildings ended up falling and collapsing.
But these buildings did, and these are controlled demolitions, acknowledged. On the left, we have a series of them. On the right, we're comparing it to Building 7. Each of them look identical. They fall almost at free fall. In the case of Building 7, at free fall acceleration, as we'll talk about. So you can't tell the difference. So should there have been an investigation into the possible use of explosives, given that it looks exactly like a controlled demolition?
Yeah.
Given that fire, the official cause of these buildings collapses, have never brought down one of these steel frame fire protected structures. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the typical features of controlled demolition? And does Building 7 have any of them? Let's begin with feature number 1. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, listen to Dan Rather as we watch from this view from the north, this building coming down and his initial impressions.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, that thing just falls down perfectly.
Incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What was that, Dan? You're hearing Dan, right?
Yeah, I can hear Dan. He said
okay.
It's too reminiscent of the images we've seen on television where buildings are destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock them down.
Well,
oh my God.
He never repeated that statement, of course, and we've never seen since 9/11, except 2 occasions, this building coming down. It's been swept under the rug. Well, let's look at feature number 2. Is there a straight down symmetrical progression? Well, let's look from West Street. Yeah, pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical.
Wow.
How do you do that, Ray? You've got to take out all the core columns within a fraction of a second of each other, followed about a second later by the exterior columns. Any deviation in that pattern, the building will begin to tip over. Does fire have that level of precision? If you don't set these explosives off just right, you can get something like this where the whole building will tip over instead of go down through itself, or like this where it goes down about 20 feet and stops because those explosions didn't go off. Somebody's got to go back into that building and set these charges. Or buildings that are damaged on one side, they fall over. That's just natural. We're watching a building, in this case, due to poor construction, simply fall over. Well, that's what we would have expected if Building 7 was going to fall due to damage on its northeast corner, which is what NIST's theory is.
And by the way, really quick, what is NIST?
NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Okay.
Who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people. And they sure tried to do that. In fact, they said, oh no, it didn't come down at free fall, because we're looking at feature number 4 now. How fast did this building come down? Well, they finally acknowledge, after being publicly embarrassed in a press conference, that it did in fact come down at free fall. David Chandler proved it. He proved it to them and everybody else. And what does that mean? That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. It's gaining velocity every second. Mm-hmm. That's the definition of acceleration. Through what? Through 40,000 tons of structural steel, which is designed with a strength of 5 times to resist any such collapse. This is an incredibly mammoth building. But NIST was forced to acknowledging, okay, it did come down, you got us, at free fall. And they put this in their final report 7 years later. The final report came out after 9/11. they say, okay, it came down at freefall, but they don't acknowledge the implications of that freefall. What is that? That not one of these 80 columns, 81, gave any resistance in this building's for this building's collapse. Not one of them.
So
Where
let
did
me
they
ask you this
go?
question, Richard. The diagram I'm looking at right now, the way these buildings are built, and again, Tower 7 or Building 7 is a 47-story building with 81 columns going up and down. What you're saying is literally 81 for 81 of these columns had to fall at the same speed or same rate in order to accomplish the way this building fell. Like, I mean, that seems
They
impossible.
let go of their strength.
Okay.
Is what they
let go of
did.
their
Something
strength. Okay.
caused all of them instantly to let go of their strength. And I'm telling you, it couldn't have been
That's
these
impossible.
fires.
That fire, in my opinion, again, layman's opinion, you're saying that fire was able to impact 81 for 81 to let go of 81 for 81 strength at exactly the same time.
That's the official narrative.
That makes no sense.
So we have to look at those columns in the pile. Are they dismembered? Well, here's the pile. This was a moment resisting, meaning columns and beams rigidly welded together with X braces in addition to that. A 47-story skyscraper falling like a house of cards to a pile 4 to 6 stories tall. It should have been, if it was going to collapse at all, 20 stories tall with major chunks of the building. Look, this is how buildings look when they fall.
Right.
In this case, due to earthquakes. The columns and beams are not severed all one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. We can recognize the building as a building,
Right,
as opposed to a house of cards.
right. And actually, you know what? It's interesting. Just when was it? A couple weeks ago, where you had the big earthquake in like Thailand or Myanmar or something. I mean, the buildings fell sideways. Like that earthquake caused the buildings to fall sideways.
Well, most of them did.
Yeah.
There was certainly one that fell down through itself, but it was under construction. It was not braced
Got
yet.
it.
So it was concrete. So all kinds of issues there. No, that's a good point. Most all buildings, some of them pancake on each other, and that can happen. But these fires don't do that.
Right.
A major 7.7 earthquake can.
Right.
So the question is, what would have caused that? Well, explosions could cause that. Do we have witnesses of explosions? NIST says no, there's no witnesses of explosions. Let's listen to a few of them. Here's Daryl, a medical student.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. And it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caved out. And the building followed after that. And
about a second later, the bottom floor caved out. A sound of a clap of thunder, a shock wave ripping through the building, windows busting, and then the building coming down. How about Kevin McPadden, who was an Air Force medic on hand to help people, but they were pulled back about 6 blocks from the building, told that it was going to come down on its own. This is what he heard.
You heard explosions, like boom. It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Wow.
And what did this gentleman see?
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere.
A big flash, and then the building coming down. And this is the actual deputy director of the Office of Emergency Management in Building 7 on the 23rd floor. And he had to go back. They were all evacuated before the building came down, but he had to go back into the building at about 12:30 And this is his experience.
Then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft, and it was down the hall.
Floors, gaping holes in floors up above him due to an explosion inside the building that blew an elevator car 30 feet out of the elevator shaft, 30 feet down the hall. And she's freaked out by all of this. Of course, this can't happen from damage to the outside of the building. This is inside the middle of the building.
And how could a fire cause an elevator car to get flown that far? I mean, elevator cars are thousands of pounds probably themselves. That makes zero sense.
No, and yeah, correct. And they were evacuated out, but some were called to this emergency meeting on the 23rd floor. Barry Jennings was one of them. Michael Hess, they were together. They were late. They didn't even realize the building had been evacuated. So they got up to the 23rd floor, found it empty. They were told to get out of there. This is their experience on the way out.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What's the sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs? Bombs like this heard in the late morning of 9/11 in that vicinity?
Yeah, here's one of the guys. He can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
No witnesses of explosions, says NIST. Well, talk to these guys, did you? They say, we've talked to 116 first responders and no witnesses of explosions. Wow. Interesting. Well, if this was a planned event, people would know about it in advance. People like the fire chiefs. This one, Nick Visconti, says, we're moving the command post over this way. The command post was, by the way, their command post was near Building 7, so they're getting out of the way. That building's coming down. They're saying, well, how do they know the building's going to come down? No steel frame fire protected structures ever come down due to fires. And you saw the fires in this building. Those are fightable fires. But listen to the Chief Hayden.
Well, we had our special operations people set up surveying instruments to monitor and see if there was any movement in the building. We were concerned of the possibility of collapse of the building. And we had a discussion with one particular engineer there, and we asked him if we allowed it to burn, could we anticipate a collapse, and if so, how soon? And it turned out that he was pretty much right on the money, that he said in its current state you have about 5 hours.
Wait a minute. No steel frame protected structures ever collapsed, but this engineer says this one's going to collapse, and he says it's going to collapse in about 5 hours, which is exactly what it did. Of course, this prediction could only have been made with foreknowledge.
Yeah.
So,
let me ask you something real quick. I refresh my memory. So the towers 1 and 2 got hit maybe around like 9 o'clock or 9:30 Eastern time in the morning, right? New York time. Because I remember living in California, it was around 6 a.m. our time because my mom woke me up because my parents were in town. So and then Building 7 probably fell, maybe 7 hours later at like 5 p.m. Is that the timing?
Roughly.
Okay. Got it. Go on.
5:20 for Building 7.
5:20.
And then, so if people engineered this event, then people would know about it in advance, right? Like these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion over their shoulder, looking back at the building, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this.
You hear Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down. Building is about to blow up. Moving back here. All right, guys.
It's amazing. They're saying keep your eye on the building. It's coming down. The building's about to blow up. That's insane.
Flame, debris coming down.
By the way, Richard, this presentation is incredible. Like, oh my God.
Well, it's the information.
I know, but the fact that
the building is about to blow up, flame and debris coming down. Come on. I mean, not only is it going to come down, but it's going to blow up now. So and not only that, remember Kevin McPadden who heard explosions earlier? Well, he's held back with these other people, just wondering what's going on. He's listening to a radio held in the hand of who he believed was a Red Cross worker. Let's listen to that experience.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
What? Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns now? See how this story shakes up? It's incredible. Listen to the BBC announcing the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it even happened.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy.
Sketchy indeed. There's still the building in the air right behind her.
I remember this. And you know what? I think I've played this on the podcast, or at least I've talked about playing this on the podcast. So the BBC report was talking about Building 7 collapsing. And while she's telling us about the building collapsing, the building is standing right behind her. It hasn't even
It's
collapsed
incredible.
yet. That's incredible. It's ridiculous, actually.
Well, and the experts are clear on this. Listen to one of the top European controlled demolition companies.
Danny Jowenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen.
It's been imploded.
Dit is in opdracht gebeurd.
It's a higher
Het heeft
job
een team
done
gedaan
by
van
a
experts.
team of experts. Wow. Well, he's clear on what's going on there, as are more than 36 structural engineers signed on to the petition demanding a new investigation, like Kamal Obeid in the San Francisco Bay Area. A localized failure, he says, in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards.
Wow.
Without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. Well, this caught the attention, of course, of other engineers like Professor Leroy Hulsey of the University of Alaska, who spent 4 years studying this building because he says, gosh, there's hundreds of buildings similarly designed. If they can come down at freefall due to a few small fires, then we got a big problem in our skyscrapers. So he does these studies with two competing software programs to corroborate each other, and they did. They found that if we do what NIST did in their computer model and we take out columns 79, 80, and 81 in the northeast corner, then what would happen? Well, here's what happens. The building begins to tip over.
Yeah.
You get kicked in the knee and you fall in that direction. This is intuitive. But so what do we have to do to make this building look like the video did? Well, let's compare it to the video. Here we have the video of the building's collapse in the center. On the left, we have the University of Alaska, which says, okay, we take out all the columns in the building at once. And by God, sure enough, it looks exactly like the video. It comes down at freefall and symmetrically. Whereas on the right, we have the NIST computer model, which they used to prove their theory, which completely disproves it. Because A, it shows they did take out 400 structural steel connections every second to get this building to fall, but still, they can't back engineer it enough to make it not tip over. So they stop the animation, or they don't show us what happens to the rest of it. It begins to buckle like a natural collapse would. It begins to fall over. So they completely stop. So the findings from the University of Alaska State Fire didn't cause the collapse of this building. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. Thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and girders. The collapse of this building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, not a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST.
Let me ask you this question, Richard. Let me ask you this. I mean, this is fascinating. So in a controlled demolition, okay, let's say we were doing a controlled demolition of building 7. You've got 81 columns. How does that work? Is there dynamite set up at the exact same at one location?
Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out exactly how that works right now, as a matter of fact, because what NIST did not do is look at the evidence of persistent extreme heat and molten steel and iron. But guess what? FEMA before them did. And they produced their building performance assessment team report in May of 2002. And they have a metallurgical examination of the steel in that report in Appendix C. And what do they find? Never before observed eutectic reactions, intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like you see here in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel. Fires don't do this to steel. We'll talk about that. But they found rapid oxidation, sulfidation, liquid iron. That's molten iron. That's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit is the hottest that office fires get to. And most of them are only 500 to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but this is 3,000 degrees. Hot sulfur corrosion attack on the steel. They document this. This is perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, says the New York Times, but it was completely ignored and omitted from the NIST report when they took over this investigation with $20 million and at the end of it and produced their own report with none of this evidence in it. Well, gosh, the author of this report, Jonathan Barnett, says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. What's the problem with that? Evaporating steel is 4,000 degrees, 4 times the temperature that normal office fires, the official narrative of this building's collapse, cause.
So again, just for us dummies, a regular fire, whether that's an office fire or the fire that's burning in our fireplace, how hot is that? Is that at maximum 500 degrees Fahrenheit?
Well, fireplace is a unique environment, often fed with air, but even so, it only burns 1,500 degrees, less than half of the temperatures capable of melting girders, like Abelhaz Astani Azel, a structural engineer here, documents the melting of girders. And so, your barbecue is maybe 500 degrees. That's a typical office. It's even hotter than typical office fires because, again, it's designed to produce heat. Office fires or home fires can get 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, never more than the absolute hottest 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. And the temperatures we're looking at here in the molten metal pouring out of the material held in the crab claw excavator at the World Trade Center aftermath, we're seeing molten material yellow and white hot. We can tell the temperature of molten iron or steel by its color. We're exceeding 2,500 degrees here. Wow. More than twice what office fires ever get to typically. So we know it's certainly not jet fuel. No plane hit building 7, right? Maybe I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, that's
no
a
plane
great
hit
point.
this building. Yeah.
I remember
But it went down anyway.
the two big things that you just kept hearing over and over was molten steel. You kept hearing that, which I don't think anybody even really understood. And then obviously they said it was the jet fuel that caused the collapse of World Trade Center 1 and 2. But that's an amazing point you just made. There was no plane.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And there's no jet fuel. And even at the Twin Towers, jet fuel only burns 600 degrees in open air, according to the major engineering company, ME Petroleum. So, my gosh, fires, they model fires at 1830 degrees at their extreme hottest. But we're talking temperatures twice that. So what can produce that? Can thermite produce that? Well, what is thermite?
Yeah. What is
an incendiary used by the military? Thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Well, maybe we're getting here somewhere, Ray, because if thermite were used, it would explain the extreme heat up to 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It would explain the molten it would explain the sulfur, because sulfur's added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. It would also explain the iron, the molten iron, not steel, but iron. Where does molten iron come from? Well, that's the byproduct of thermite. Is it found in the World Trade Center dust? Abundantly. The U.S. Geological Survey identifies all the samples throughout the World Trade Center as having huge quantities of previously molten iron microspheres, about the diameter of a human hair on average. They're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. The EPA says we don't know where these came from, and neither does the U.S. Geological Survey, but they're used as a signature component to identify what the World Trade Center dust was, but they don't know where it came from. They don't even speculate. Up to 6% of these samples are previously molten iron microspheres, up to 4 tons by extrapolation, an incredible quantity of spheres in all the dust. The R.J. Lee, who does studies on the dust, also says they're formed during the event, not before, by the welders putting the building together, not afterward by the iron workers taking it apart, but during the actual event. Well, if they were formed during the event, how might they have been formed? Let's do an experiment. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one. Let's burn some thermite and see what happens. And there it goes, and what we see is thousands of sparks, but they're not sparks. They cool and fall into the pan as previously molten, iron microspheres. Why are they spherical? Well, that's just what aerosolized liquids do. They form themselves into droplets that are spherical by surface tension. So under pressure, thermite would do exactly that, and it would fall in all the World Trade Center dust. And that's how we get previously molten iron microspheres in all the World Trade Center dust. Well, is there, and that was evidence of ignited thermite. Could there be any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Well, yeah, a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit studied many samples. Here's 4 of them. And they found these red-gray chips in their dust samples, and they're curious because they thought they were paint at first. They're red on one side and gray on the other. So they're obviously fluid applied. But unlike paint, these are attracted by a magnet. They're very, very small. A 1/16 of an inch is like the largest of them. So they get real curious, and they do X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, XEDS, on the red layer, and they find aluminum and iron, the ingredients of thermite. Wait, what's the ingredients of thermite doing in the World Trade Center dust samples? This is not good. So they zoom in 50,000 times with an electron microscope, and they find nano-sized particles of iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets. They're 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair.
Oh my God.
That's how big. This is very high and highly engineered stuff. Iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets set in a bed of oxygen, silica, carbon. This is organic material, which is used in high energy explosives to expand rapidly, turning into gases and knocking things over. That's how explosives work. But incendiaries work by means of massive heat. They burn things up at 4,000 degrees. That's the difference between an explosive and incendiary, and this appears to cross the boundary. They did peer-reviewed literature. They found that it's called super thermite. Lawrence Livermore Lab actually created this before 2001. And they found that these are explosive composites based on thermite reactions, whose fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed on the nanometer size scale. You see, when you get these materials so small at the nanoscale, their surface volume increases exponentially. So you've engineered an incendiary to become more explosive. When you put it in a heater, a differential scanning calorimeter, they ignite at about 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, that's what the peer-reviewed literature showed. Could the samples have done that too? Do they react like nanothermite? Yeah. The 4 samples that they studied all reacted at 800 degrees Fahrenheit, igniting, proving what? That they're an exothermic reaction. Well, what do they produce when they ignite? Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature. Sorry.
That's all right.
Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found and studied in the World Trade Center dust by R.J. Lee. So we know exactly where those molten iron microspheres came from. It's not a mystery. They're found attached, in fact, to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here.
This isn't.
So we know exactly where they came from. This is a self-corroborating set of repeatable experimental data that could be put to use in a court of law to bring the real perpetrators of 9/11 to justice. You see, these are not made in a cave in Afghanistan. Right? This is made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratory. So they conclude in this 25-page peer-reviewed paper produced in 2009 that the red layer is active unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. This paper stands uncontested. Nobody's put forth their own peer-reviewed paper saying, hey, here's what this is. They've had since 2009 to challenge this paper. It has not been challenged. Oh, people will raise their hand and say, oh no, this is paint. We just proved that it wasn't paint. Paint doesn't have these exotic properties. In fact, we've proven with 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features that this is direct evidence of destruction with explosives. Fire doesn't create any one of these features, let alone all 10 of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And all 10 of them have to be challenged. And not one of them has been successfully challenged. with additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony, that becomes proof of controlled demolition. A body of proof, by the way, which has convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to sign on publicly to the petition, staking their reputations and demanding a new 9/11 investigation. And many of them appear in our film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom.
Is this film series, this is a new film series, or this has been out for?
Yep, and we've produced 2 episodes already. The next one is coming out next week. We're very excited about it. Episode 3, where we get into the actual mechanics of the fall of this building at free fall. And we have, in fact, we've partnered with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. Mick Harrison, their litigation director, and I are presenting this evidence in a boardroom to the grand jury.
Oh, wow.
Our own stand-in grand jurors. It's very nicely done. And I encourage everybody to review this. You can go to richardgage911.org and take a look at all these experts and support the film. You can co-produce the film for a $500 donation. We'll actually make you an executive producer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we're encouraging.
Have you guys tried
participate.
to shop this to like a Netflix or any of those guys, or will they not?
Well, let's get it done first. I've got 3 out of about 12 episodes done. So when we'll have that discussion. By the way, there's a dedicated website that people can visit at 911c2c.org.
Okay.
That's 911. Here we are. 911c2c.org.
Okay, great.
Letter C, number 2, letter C. Because we got to ask ourselves, Ray, if that information is so clear at Building 7, I can assure you, once you look at the evidence, it becomes even more clear in the case of the Twin Towers, which we're going to jump into.
Yeah.
Because just look at them. We have, we show them together here so we can see how identical they are. Even though they have very different damage patterns, we have upward, outward arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons each, trailed by thick white smoke clouds. Steel is not flammable. What are these thick white smoke clouds? Well, thermite produces something else beside molten iron. It produces thick white smoke clouds of aluminum oxide ash. So let's get into it. We're going to be looking for the features of controlled demolition. Let's begin with feature number 1. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, here's the North Tower. It's standing still, and suddenly it's in uniform downward motion. No jolt, no hesitation upon impact with the cold, hard steel below. So what about the North Tower? Same thing. It's at rest, and all of a sudden it's in uniform after you see all these explosions.
Yeah. The towers seem like they fell at free fall speed too, and free fall.
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
It's not quite free fall.
Okay.
But it's an important question. So the NIST tells us that the upper part drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. NIST calls this the column failure theory. Zdeněk Bazant, from whom this theory came from, calls it the crush down, crush up theory. Well, we're going to test this theory, but it was produced in just 2 days after 9/11. The most obfuscated piece of mathematical wizardry ever to come out of an engineering department was produced in just 2 days after 9/11. It took engineers 10 years to decode.
Jeez.
We'll find out what they found when they decoded it, but obviously it suffers from Newton's third law of motion. There's an equal and opposite destructive effect when 2 bodies collide. Let's take a Mack truck and a Volkswagen. Who wins? The Mack truck, right?
Truck,
the stronger, bigger. And so Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. The lightest part of a structure cannot possibly destroy the cold, hard, heavier, intact steel below, which, by the way, gets heavier and heavier and heavier as we proceed down the building. The beams, the columns get bigger until halfway down. They're 52 inches by 22 inches, and then they begin to infill, and they get almost solid steel at the very base. So let's just look and see what's happening with this Volkswagen. Is it crushing the building below? No. When you look at, let me make it easier for you. Watch the lower red line, the point of plane impacts.
Yeah.
The upper part is telescoping in on itself. It's not driving anything underneath it down. We can see that quite plainly. It's being destroyed in the first few seconds here, the upper section of this building above the point of plane impacts. If it were there, you would see it. But none of the photos, none of the videos show an upper section driving the rest of the building down. If it were there, it would have driven these few remaining columns standing for 6 seconds, 800 feet in the air. But they weren't crushed by this massive pile driver. No. And then something else, another explosion takes them out. What are we looking at? What do our eyes see? We see, well, one of these is a volcano. You tell me which one. A volcanic eruption. I mean, upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying, solid, molten objects, trailing thick white smoke clouds. Did you figure out which one it was?
As I'm looking at this, I was going to say, I thought the one at the right would be the volcano. Did I guess that correctly?
Yep.
Okay.
Good guess. You got it. But there's a similarity here which cannot be denied. But of course, it was denied by Zdeněk Bazant. In fact, he says the upper part drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then crushed itself. You can even see it in his drawing, but that's not what happened, obviously. What we have is these explosions we just saw the evidence of blowing out and away from the core columns, leaving many of them intact while the rest of the building was destroyed. This drawing by John Cole makes it very clear. He's a civil engineer. So we have to ask ourselves, what could have destroyed it? Well, let's look at feature number 2. Is there evidence of explosions and flashes of light? Well, the first responders were recorded within a month of 9/11. 12,000 pages of testimony, all read by Professor Graham McQueen, who found that 156 of them were witnesses themselves of explosions, all of which were denied by NIST in their final report. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down, says this first responder. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. You're going to hear this order of events again and again. They're seeing something. They're feeling something. They're hearing something. Explosions. Before the tower collapses. It shook my bones shortly before the first tower came down. I remember feeling the ground shaking. Heard a terrible noise. And then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. Like when they demolish a building, with each popping sound initially an orange, and then a red flash came out of the building and then would just go all around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top, simultaneously from all 4 sides. Material shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does this fire chief need to be? These are expert witnesses.
These are expert witnesses all saying the same thing, but man, it just fell on deaf ears.
Well,
on
it didn't
purpose.
fall in any ears
Or
for
any ears. Yeah.
4 years.
Yeah, exactly.
They kept it secret for 4 years. The New York Times sued the city to release this information. And then when they finally released it, they published it and put it on their website. We didn't know about it until August of 2005. So by then, it's sort of too late. There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt, all these explosions. The building was blowing out on all 4 sides. We actually heard the pops, You heard the pops of the building.
Yeah.
I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors. And then there was a series of smaller explosions which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors.
I think we get it. Like, this is just insane. What? Oh my God. Yeah, let's skip through all.
So let's see if the building is straight down and symmetrical. Let's take a look. It actually begins to tip over the South Tower. It's tipping over at 22 degrees. Well, wait. We have asymmetrical loading on the part below by this part that's tipping over. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires. We have asymmetrical damage from the plane impacts. How in the world do we get complete symmetrical damage all the way around each face of this building? It makes no sense.
It
doesn't follow at all. In fact, just like it's corroborating, this video is corroborating the firefighters like a belt all the way around, all these explosions. So let's zoom in on the leading corner of these explosions and ask ourselves, what are we seeing? I see about a dozen individual explosions in this looped video, floor by floor, traveling at a rapid pace down the building. You can see the individual explosions. This is not a nuclear weapon going off, as has been hypothesized by some. These are not directed energy weapons weakening steel. These are individual explosions which had to have been pre-placed in the Twin Towers' exterior perimeter structural steel system. And we can see that they're not just nicely and neatly patterned like that all the time. Here's a series of isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry, occurring 20 stories down below, 40 stories down below the zone of destruction. So these mistimed? What's going on here? 60 stories down. There's no accounting in the official narrative whatsoever for these isolated explosive ejections.
I remember seeing videos of all these explosions that were happening much further down on each of the towers. And
you just saw all that. Yeah. And here they are occurring, a dozen of them off the left face of the South Tower as it begins to lean to the right. So its structure is being destroyed in this looped video. You see a dozen of them almost all at once. So the structure is being disintegrated, which is why it doesn't continue to act as a rigid body and fall off to the right. It just settles in. Well, how fast is this section coming down, this top section? It comes down at 2/3 of free fall acceleration. These are clocked by physicists, David Chandler in this case. That means that 90% of the strength of this building has been removed or is being removed floor by floor below the fall. So that's most all of the strength. Well, let's look at that strength. The facade of these buildings is incredible with this Verandil truss, 3 vertical columns, 14-inch square steel tube columns marching every 3 feet, 4 inches all the way around the building. There's more steel in the facade than glass. This is one of the earliest very tall skyscrapers, and they weren't taking any chances. 47 massive core columns, 240 perimeter columns had to have been removed, 90% of it, to facilitate 2/3 of free fall. Now, what happened to those lateral structural steel sections that were removed? Well, they were ejected far, 600 feet away, destroying the winter gardens of the World Financial Center, landing in the skyscrapers all around the World Trade Center building. We can see them, these pieces here, by the way, a typical 4 and or 8-ton structural steel section, depending on where they came from in the building. They're ejected laterally, landing up to 600 feet in every direction. These are individual, freely flying structure like this one, freely flying, about to hit World Trade Center 7, back to, forward to, back to. This is horizontal. How does gravity work again? Down. What's going on here? Out. Massively out. In fact, there's enough energy here to fire a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these that did that. In fact, out past the boundaries of the World Trade Center itself.
By the way, Richard, do you know, like, were all of the buildings that surrounded the World Trade Center, were they all, I know they weren't, they didn't fall down, but were they kind of rendered inhabitable again, or like were they just
most of them?
Okay,
most of them, yeah. We could take it piece by piece, but let's do this instead. Let's find out if all of that steel was distributed outside the footprint of the building. 100,000 tons of it. God. What's crushing the building?
Yeah.
We can't have the steel being ejected laterally past the boundaries of World Trade Center 7 and have the weight of that responsible for crushing the building.
Right.
What was it? Well, maybe it was the concrete. Let's look at the concrete, because we had 110 concrete floors, each an acre in size. Concrete poured over metal decking supported by lightweight steel trusses. We don't find 110 of these assemblies. We don't find 50 of them at the bottom. We don't find 20. We don't find one.
Oh my gosh.
In a real pancaking collapse, we're looking for pancakes. We don't see them. And here's an earthquake. In this case, in Mexico, we see pancakes, right?
You see, when you say pancakes, we're talking, you see the layers of concrete with the steel trellis. I mean, basically you're seeing the floors, right?
Yep, these are floors in a real pancaking collapse like Myanmar. We saw the pancakes there.
Yeah.
But where is all the concrete? We're talking about 90,000 tons in each building of missing concrete. Oh, there it is. It's pulverized in midair. 90,000 tons of concrete on each floor.
So the
pulverized to a fine powder.
So the concrete is what caused that inferno of powder that we see in all the videos. That's
what you're looking at. In fact, the USGS finds that this is 30% concrete in all the World Trade Center dust spread river to river. Now, how could it be powderized? Well, guess what? American Society of Testing and Materials, test C856, identifies that when you get concrete above 1,500 degrees, it can turn to white powder.
Okay.
So could thermite, which gets to 4,000 degrees, nanothermite particularly, sprayed on the underside of these slabs, turned all of that concrete to powder in addition to evaporating the steel trusses and metal decking? That's the theory.
Okay, but are you
because
saying
it's
the
pulverized.
thermite would have to have been sprayed? Like obviously the thermite wasn't there when the World Trade Centers were built.
Well, we'll take a look at that. But first, let's consider if this concrete was spread river to river across lower Manhattan in a 3 square mile area in a blanket 3 inches thick. What's crushing the building? It wasn't the steel. And now we know it's not the concrete.
Because the concrete's dust.
Most of it actually went into the river. So it's not, but wait a minute. All that weight of that concrete and steel was used by Zdeněk Bezant in his calculation to show that the top part of the building crushed the building below it. So But that weight wasn't there. This is 2/3 the weight of the building is the concrete and the steel. So there's not much left. And yet he not only used all of that weight, but he doubled the mass up above. I told you it took engineers 10 years to decode this mathematical wizardry. Not only that, they decreased the column capacity below by a factor of 3. This is the whole thing was rigged in favor of a collapse. And this is refuted, challenged in a peer-reviewed paper. Well, in the paper that was intended to be peer-reviewed by Tony Zamboti, Richard Johns, Gregory Zudolinski. But when they submitted it to the American Society of Civil Engineers, who published Bazant's original paper, they said, oh, we're not going to publish this paper. Why? It's out of scope, they said.
Wow.
What? How is it out of scope to publish a scientific challenge to a previously published paper in that journal, the American Journal of Journal of Engineering
me
Mechanics.
Of all the doctors that came out against COVID, and they published all their stuff against COVID, and then whether it was the Lancet or all these places would not publish them because they were going against the COVID narrative.
It's a complete abuse of science.
Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself, how would they have access? You hinted at before.
Yeah.
Was this stuff built into the building? Well, no, it didn't have to be. Most researchers suggest, and the statistics of the evacuation that NIST actually did suggest, that this building was only half occupied. And in the months and years before 9/11, there were fireproofing upgrades in the building, coincidentally on the floors that the planes hit.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So this is damning evidence dug up by Kevin Ryan at digwithin.net. And it certainly needs more research. But if you go to digwithin.net, you can find a lot more about who occupied these floors and what the opportunities were
so let me
for
ask
demolition
you this.
access.
So let me ask you this. Then it would be plausible for the nanothermite to have been applied during this process where they said they were fireproofing, a fireproofing upgrade.
Yes,
it would be plausible.
Most fireproofing is cementitious material, looks like cement, very lightweight. But there are intumescent paints, which many architects use in their buildings to reduce the thickness, because it expands and provides fireproofing when it gets hot.
Okay.
So those are liquid applied, and we know nanothermite was liquid applied. So could it have been applied as an intumescent paint under the guise of fireproofing?
Yes, exactly,
possibility.
Exactly.
Another possibility is the access to the core columns and beams in the building, which would give you immediate, if you had access to the elevator shafts, they're right next to the core columns and beams in the building, in fact. But you would actually need to cut through 2 inches of gypsum board in each of those elevator hoistways. Well, interestingly, that would produce a lot of dust, right? Well, Scott Forbes, the senior database administrator at Fiduciary Trust on some of these floors, he said this is what he said.
It was probably the week leading up to 9/11. Every morning I'd come in around 7 a.m. and the dust was incredible. It was filthy. It was like the cleaners weren't cleaning. Right where the windows were, there was a sill which enclosed radiators. I was sick to death of the dust which was appearing on the windowsills. It was dirty grey and very, very noticeable in that week leading up to 9/11.
Okay, so some more research there. Well, who was doing this elevator modernization? Ace Elevator had the contract. They came out of nowhere to get this contract. Why would the Port Authority have given one of the largest, most sophisticated elevator modernization programs in the industry's history to a small maintenance company with basically just one customer? In this case, the World Trade Center.
And that was a company called Ace Elevator?
Yes, and they took this contract, or they they got it somehow from Otis Elevator, who had installed and had been maintaining these elevators for the life of the building.
Yeah, Otis
So-
Otis is a monster. I think they're the number one player in the elevator space. So you're saying that Otis Elevator was the vendor for the World Trade Centers, and then all of a sudden it got switched to Ace Elevators. Okay, I mean, that's pretty...
And they were gone
shady.
on the day of 9/11. Even more shady, there was a labor dispute that day, says Dan Boyle, or in that time frame, and the members of that company, about 50 of them, were pulled out of their job to a union meeting to discuss business. So they weren't sacrificed.
They weren't there. That kind of reminds me of, and maybe you're going to talk about this, but Larry Silverstein, who I believe, I know. Was
Well,
the
we
owner.
can, but we're running out of
Okay,
time.
I know. We're getting. All right, let me ask you this. I'm going to have you back on. This is insane how detailed.
Well,
and good
even
this
more
is.
insane. You just got to know this. What happened to all that steel?
Yeah.
Easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history. 400 truckloads a day were carted away from the site, shipped to China for recycling before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper forensic investigation. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately, but it didn't. And so we have the 10 key characteristic features that, once again, in the Twin Towers, of controlled demolition, along with some very uncharacteristic features, and which is direct evidence of destruction with explosives. Fire doesn't create any one of these features, let alone all of them. And so this becomes proof of controlled demolition. Again, a body of proof which has convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to sign on to the petition, become part of our film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. You can see all this evidence in these documentaries that we produced at Richard Gage 9/11. The outline of this evidence is in a brochure. You can download it and print it and hand it out to every architect and engineer you can find, because the truth about 9/11, as we are beginning to discover, is a dark one. I mean, where are we going to draw our line in the sand? Do we wait for the next 9/11? I have news for you. Over the last 4 years, we have been dealt it in the form of the false disease, which has been engineered, and the false solution to it, which has been engineered, which is more of a problem than the disease itself. So we got to speak the truth. This is absolutely critical.
You are a beast. You are an absolute beast, man. And listen, everybody, what Richard presented us, it was normally a 2-hour presentation. And I had asked him, I said, hey, can we condense this down to an hour? Because that's my audience's threshold. So the reason it sounded like he was speeding through it was because he was kind of speeding through it, because I asked him to speed through it. But listen, this was phenomenal. Your level of preparation is second to none. The receipts that you bring with this presentation are second to none. So let me ask you this, because I do think we're going to need to do a follow-up, and actually maybe we'll talk about COVID-19 in that follow-up, because I know you have a lot of thoughts there. But what to me really came to my mind was the playbook, man. It's a playbook. And I talk about playbooks all the time. And the playbook that was developed with 9/11 was reapplied with COVID. We might even be seeing that playbook right now in terms of the stuff going on in Gaza. There's so many things that if you really take a critical view and look back to the past, it absolutely helps you make sense of kind of what's going on in the future, what's going on presently. So let me ask you this. I've talked a lot on the podcast about basically 9/11 being what enabled the forever wars, enabled invading Afghanistan, invading Iraq, obviously getting the natural resources, oil and natural gas from both of those countries, opium actually from Afghanistan as well. I mean, fundamentally, and you don't have to answer this if this is not part of what you are about. But, what was it all about? If we're in agreement that it wasn't 19 random Muslim dudes with box cutters, doing an act of terrorism, what do you think it was all about?
It's a multifaceted set of motivations governed by the most powerful people in the world who control the U.S. government, most governments around the world, the media, the oil companies, the insurance companies, the banking cartels. They have much to gain. They all profited enormously from this operation. We've invaded 2 countries in the Middle East, securing, as you mentioned, the opium production in Afghanistan, surrounding, and in Iraq, the oil companies. But with those 2 countries having been invaded, we've now, or for the last 14 years anyway, surrounded Iran.
Yeah.
The last 20 years.
Yeah.
And so we've gotten kicked out of Afghanistan. By the way, since we left Afghanistan, the Taliban, who shut down the opium production when they got into power, and then they were kicked out by us. Opium production skyrocketed under our watch. After we got kicked out again, back down to 185 metric tons per year. Just about.
Oh, that's fascinating. I've talked about how with 9/11, we used that to get rid of the Taliban, a forever war for 20 years, and then we hand it right back to the Taliban. I have not linked that to opium production. And so what you're saying, and I know you're right because I have heard this. So when we took over Afghanistan, we basically upped the opium production, gave it back to the Taliban in 2020. Skyrocket. And I mean,
enormously, that's off the charts.
That's insane.
90% of the world's opium comes from Afghanistan. And that amounts to 4 times the profits of all the oil companies put together.
Oh my God. That is incredible. And now the Taliban, which is back in power, they're not, why are they not monetizing it?
Well, apparently they're trying to feed their people.
Okay.
I don't know. That's my best guess.
Okay. Well, listen.
But we were warned. But
yeah, go ahead.
Uh-huh.
No. I was just going to say, anything else that you want to convey in this episode, I have to have you back on, and maybe we will prep the audience. Maybe you'll be my first Joe Rogan style 3-hour episode, because I have a feeling everyone is willing to listen to you for 3 hours. They're probably not.
Well, I think it would.
Go ahead.
I think it'd be more productive for us to launch into the playbook.
Okay.
Because I have done 2 other presentations using the same playbook as 9/11. I call it the parallels of 9/11 and COVID, and how that all played out and continues to play out.
I would love that. I would love that
today, but also in the false flag of Gaza, performed by the Israelis against their own people using Hamas patsies, which they founded and funded. We go into depth on that whole playbook, which is quite extensive and worthy of getting into. I think we covered the evidence for the World Trade Center quite sufficiently today, even though we had to rush through it. People get the idea.
Absolutely.
So there's 2 other presentations there for you.
I would love that, man. I would love that. Listen, you're a beast. You are an absolute beast. And I know you've been
I'll tell my wife that.
Yeah, exactly. I know you've been on Patrick Bet-David's podcast, Jake Shields. I talked about this in your lead-in intro. Have you ever been on Joe Rogan?
No, we're trying to wake up Tucker and Joe and have them stop just dancing around the edges of Building 7 and really dive into this evidence. If any of you know Joe or you know Tucker, let's get the word out. This evidence, and
I do
send
have
this
contacts
podcast
to both. I also have contacts to Candace Owens. I think Candace Owens would probably be somebody that would
see this information would back all 3 of those major podcasters with their comments being called conspiracy theorists. Well, let's bring them, as you say, the receipts.
Absolutely.
and help them.
Absolutely. All right, listen, everybody. Good golly, Miss Molly. This was fantastic. Richard, I genuinely appreciate it. Hang on the line. Okay, everybody, if you listened to this, you need to go back and either through Spotify or YouTube, you need to watch this one, because the presentation that Richard delivered us was just second to none. It was absolutely second to none. The graphics, the real footage that he pulled from, starting in 2001, 2002, from the BBC, from CBS, from NBC, all of the reports that he gave, all of the firsthand, what's the word I'm looking for? All of the eyewitness interviews and all that. That was absolutely incredible. Oh my God. All right. Stay on the line, buddy. Call a spade, everybody. The way Richard Gage does. You're the OG call a spade guy. That's my tagline, but you know what? I think it's your tagline. All right, hang on the line.
This episode was brought to you by the new book Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.